Greetings, Algo artisans. We got a special treat today. I've got some excerpts from an interview between Colonel Douglas Macgregor and Natalie Brunell, and it turns out he is a huge fan of Bitcoin. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into it right now. So Colonel Douglas Macgregor is a bit of a controversial figure. He's been politically active since his days in the military. He takes oftentimes a very conservative lean on things. However, he does have some very common sense things to say about Bitcoin and the economy in general. So let's start with what he thinks about money printing.
I've had people say, well, we've got another year of money printing. I've heard other people say, no, we've got 5 or 10 years. I don't have an immediate answer. I'm surprised that it continues at this stage.
So Natalie had asked Colonel Macgregor what he thought of the current fiat money system, where we pretty much print money out of thin air, we put it into the economy, it causes inflation, and it's the way that it's been done for decades and decades now. And this was his answer. He just doesn't know how much longer it can last before we see hyperinflation. We're going to get a little bit more into it, but for the moment, he is going to talk a little bit more about what's happening around the world with the way the U.S. uses that fiat currency to wage war, basically economic war on other countries, and how Russia has actually turned that to its advantage in this most recent scenario with Ukraine.
While we have been trying to do all the damage we can to Russia, that very skillfully, Mr. Putin has been waging financial war against the West. And the entire BRICS concept, which leads you to gold-backed currency, is designed to get everybody who wants to get out from under us out.
Now, he does talk more about this scenario with Vladimir Putin and what's happening, but this last bit about the BRICS, I'll just tell people who may not know, the BRICS it's a trading bloc: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and it's an alternative trade bloc to the West for, say, countries that do not want to deal with the dollar hegemony, deal with the United States and their friends' ability to use the dollar as a weapon. So here we go, more about Vladimir Putin and what's happening over there.
Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that we're killing the dollar with our own hands in the interview that he did with Tucker Carlson. I really wanted to get your reaction to that interview.
I'm waiting for him to announce that he's going to start using Bitcoin as currency.
And this is where he gets into Bitcoin and how he talks about how he feels that Bitcoin is a good answer to what's happening. It's a currency that technically is not controlled by any government. Now, there are arguments that say it could be centralized, controlled, manipulated, but for the sake of this video and argument, they're going to assume that Bitcoin is not controllable, not manipulatable. And there is also some speculation around Vladimir Putin and Bitcoin, and I will link up in the corner of this video, a video I did about what I think Putin's view is on Bitcoin, and that's based on a lot of different actions he and his country has taken. So let's move on here.
I'm one of these people that thinks if you invest $100,000 in it, eventually it's going to be worth $1 million, because the fiat currency is not going to work. The only way to get control of your own destiny right now in the West is Bitcoin, unless you want to go to gold-backed currency. But then the question is, how much gold have we really got?
So what Colonel Macgregor is referring to is a gold standard. The United States was officially on a gold standard up until 1971, and we were taken off of that standard due to numerous issues that we may or may not have been dealing with according to the reasons, the official reasons, and that's an entirely different conversation. But what he brings up here is an interesting concept that we may not have all the gold that we say we do, and there is evidence to really question how much gold we actually have and whether or not that would work as a currency for the West. So let's go ahead and continue here.
And I'm curious your thoughts on why more political leaders around the world, but especially here in the United States, aren't getting it and aren't talking about it. Is it just because they can't control it?
If you look at people in my generation, oh, that's ridiculous. Bitcoin is nonsense. Forget it. And nobody bothers to look at it. Nobody bothers to try and understand it.
Interesting question from Natalie here. She is posing one of the main reasons I think that they're not using Bitcoin or anything like it as the standard, because it's not controllable. However, Colonel Macgregor is saying also that we're ruled by basically octogenarians. We're ruled by, our politicians are all people who are past a certain age where they just don't understand Bitcoin. However, we will see later in this interview, he does actually reference the control aspect as well.
Eventually, I think we in the West will have to go to Bitcoin, because we can't go to the gold-backed solution. If we try to do that, we'll simply fail. I don't think we have enough gold to do it. So what do you do? If your fiat currency is no longer worth anything, and I think we're on that road, what do you do? Bitcoin. Now, if it weren't valuable, look, Natalie, if it weren't valuable and we couldn't go to it, why would the banks want to issue their own digital currency?
Yes, Colonel Macgregor makes a great point here. Why would the banks want to issue their own currencies if they didn't think that digital currency was valuable? I'll take it a step further. Why are all of these institutions buying thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Bitcoin so they can run their ETF products? Obviously, officialdom does see value in Bitcoin, right? The right people see value in it. It's just that, again, in my opinion, it's more about control.
Well, you have to keep in mind the principal purpose right now of government in the West, and governments in general, but particularly today ours: control. Why would you adopt something that you do not control?
And of course, there it is right there. He says it in plain English. Why would they adopt something they don't control? In the interview here, he's going to explain that he thinks they will lose control. He thinks the Fed will lose control entirely and be forced to adopt something like Bitcoin. So he's going to talk a little bit more about the Fed right here. And for those who might not be familiar, the Federal Reserve is a cartel of U.S. and European banks that control the money supply. And this was put in place in 1913 in what I believe was an unconstitutional manner. However, it is in place and they do control the money supply.
Now, what did we do before we had a Fed, a Federal Reserve? We resisted the national bank for years. We fought against it. We did have crises of various types and kinds. The government did not intervene in those crises. Everyone did not starve to death. Some people went broke, others got rich, and we continued to develop and grow as a nation and as an economy.
Now, what Colonel Macgregor is saying here is near and dear to my heart. So the Federal Reserve was established on the pretense, really, that we need someone to control the economy. We need somebody to stabilize prices and all that sort of thing. And personally, I don't believe that's the case. We did fine before that, and he's demonstrating that. And that's very historically available. So great point from the Colonel here.
The first time the government intervened in a crisis was 1929. And up until that point, where there had been no outside intervention. But the intervention came as a result of the Federal Reserve. Intervention means control. Control means that you are hostage to the government. More precisely, the international finance system, which is a banking cartel. Everything is mortgaged to that.
So this might come as a shock to some people, but when a group of billionaires control the money supply for the most economically powerful country in the world, they're probably not interested in your well-being. They're interested in their own well-being. And we have seen a lot of problems in our economy happen after the establishment of the Fed.
Nobody wants that to stop. Who has money? Well, I don't think the Fed's quite in the same position of control that it once was. And I think it's going to lose control. And then the effort will be to get it back. But what if you can't get it back? Then you have to go to an alternative, and that is Bitcoin.
Let's talk about what it means to lose control. What he's talking about is the rest of the world uses the dollar. It's the world's reserve currency. And while the world is doing that, it creates demand for the dollar. And if that demand goes away, if countries stop using the dollar, then a lot of those dollars are going to make their way back to our shores. And our ability to just print dollars and use them to buy us out of our problems will go away because we cannot effectively give those dollars to other countries and get goods for them. Right? People don't want the dollars anymore. That's why we can continue to do that. We can print dollars to send it to other countries. They will send us cars. They will send us all kinds of products. We have a lot of wealth coming into this country, and that's coming from money printed out of thin air. Now, when nobody wants those dollars anymore, we cannot send those dollars overseas to get that wealth back into our country in the form of products, in the form of cars, in the form of all kinds of things that people buy. When that happens, it's going to be a double whammy because the dollars that all those other countries are holding around the world as a reserve will also no longer be very useful. These other countries are going to sell those dollars and they'll probably end up coming back to our shores. So instead of printing money and devaluing the dollar because you have a lot more dollars chasing the same amount of goods, what's actually going to happen is a humongous amount of dollars are going to be chasing way less goods. We won't have as many goods because we won't be importing them because nobody wants our dollars, and we will have a bunch of dollars. So this would cause hyperinflation, which means that, it's going to cost $100 for a loaf of bread. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but maybe I am and maybe I'm not. Now, this is all economic theory, but it's very sound and accepted theory, and it is a major concern. So the question is, if we lose control, how do we get it back? Well, obviously, Colonel Macgregor thinks Bitcoin is the answer. I think it's at least part of the answer. So the next question we might ask is, why would the rest of the world want to stop using dollars? Well, that's because the US and its allies have been using dollars as a weapon. For example, with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the United States froze, I think it was $600 billion worth of Russian forex reserves, Russian foreign exchange reserves that were in dollar denominations, right? And now, as of very recently, and I think an article even came out today talking about how the Europeans want to just confiscate that money and use it. You're talking about more than $500 billion just disappearing. Now, the way that the US dollar reserve system was set up via Bretton Woods was that the entire world could use the dollar. There would be no limitations on using the dollar. These kinds of sanctions were out of the question, and that made the dollar sacrosanct as an international currency, an international medium of exchange for trade. So the minute we go and confiscate anybody's reserves, that is going to make that dollar no longer sacrosanct and, quite frankly, no longer safe. Why would you hold your denomination in dollars when they could just be confiscated because the U.S. doesn't like you? And let's face it, what's gone on with the U.S. over the past few decades has not been looking good around the world. Lots of conflict, lots of political issues, so on and so forth. And so this is why countries would leave the dollar. This is why the BRICS was even started, so the countries could operate on their own, trade amongst themselves, and not have the kind of controls and the concern over sanctions and the need to please the United States, which, let's face it, has not really been acting fairly around the world for quite some time now.
I think they'll lose control, and I think it'll be a default issue. Lots of people with money and lots of people without much money are all going to turn to Bitcoin, because that will be the only thing that's left that stores value.
Now, I know, all you gold bugs are out there. Hey, precious metal stores value, and absolutely it does, and he does get into that. So, he's making comments that are more or less off the cuff, and he does correct that statement. He does do that. But let's think of it this way. Bitcoin does seem to be pretty accepted around the world. So it's a store of value. It's easy to transact. You can send it overseas in a matter of minutes, and on top of that, it has the network effect. And it hasn't been broken yet. Nobody has hacked it yet, so it seems to be very secure. And that's why he is very, very into Bitcoin being the answer. So let's go ahead and continue the interview.
Now, that doesn't mean gold will become worthless by any stretch of the imagination. Gold will always be with us. So will silver, platinum, and other rare minerals and metals and so forth. But it's easier to do business in Bitcoin than it is to do business in gold. I think we know that. And it's the only real viable alternative at this point to fiat currency.
And Natalie has a great contribution here. She goes back in the conversation to some times in history where we can show how a lack of intervention from the government has probably been better for the economy than intervention.
It's also interesting to think about what has happened because of all the government intervention. I mean, you talked about 1929. Not a lot of people talk about the recession that happened in 1920 to 21. And Warren Harding was probably the last president who said, you know what, no, we're going to step out of the way and just let the economy regulate itself. And the recession was like a blip.
Okay, so I'm sure there are a lot of people who may not agree with what they're talking about and already have their arguments ready, and that's fine. But let's pretend for a moment that we do agree with what they're saying. Let's say they're right. Okay, we don't really know they're right. We would never know unless we tried, quite frankly. But let's pretend that we had a crystal ball and we knew this was correct. Now comes the real question. How do we get the message out? And my opinion is that this kind of journalism helps, that Natalie's doing, that I'm doing. And really, if you believe in this kind of thing as being the answer, then I would go ahead and share this video with people. Share this with anybody you think who will listen, quite frankly, because the more people learn about this, the more people will understand the way things work, and we have a better chance at seeing a brighter future. So here they go into that conversation as well.
How do we get that message out to the public that we really need a shift? You can't keep voting in for more intervention and more stimulus and more handout checks, because that's the very thing that's going to crush us.
Well, you're talking about the mother of all bubbles. And first of all, you've got to persuade people to believe that's even possible. In my experience in Washington and around here is that no, they refuse to believe it.
Yeah, they refuse to believe it. You have a lot of people who really are high on their own supply. They think they're all powerful. They think they can continue down this road and control everything. There are others who don't want to believe it. Maybe they know it's true, but cognitive dissonance kicks in. And let me tell you, I deal with cognitive dissonance on subjects like this on a regular basis. A lot of people just don't want their reality upset. They don't want to consider that there might have to be a very large rotation, a very large change in the way things that are going, Bitcoin because they have spent many decades building their life, building their career, and they don't want to have to change things. In the end, the older people get, the lazier they get, and that's kind of a big part of it. And another part of it is people are taking a look at the stock market. Oh, it's at all-time highs, and Natalie actually says what needs to be said right here, and I'll just say it before she does, but the fact is that everybody thinks the Fed is going to come in and rescue because that's what it always has done, at least 100 years or so. And so what nobody is accounting for is the possibility that the Fed cannot do that, and we have already outlined why that could happen. So this is the last bit here, and then we'll go ahead and conclude.
It has been fascinating to see, the stock market at all-time highs with these higher rates, so much underlying weakness in the economy. But I think there's this general understanding that, hey, if something happens, the Fed will just come in and print. So let's keep going higher.
Okay, well, I think we all know that actually going higher is probably what will happen with the stock market. In fact, a lot of these countries, Weimar Germany, I mean to say, or other third world countries that have gone through a lot of hyperinflation, their stock markets went through the roof before everything collapsed. So we have to be real careful with that. In fact, if we see the stock market really going sky high nonstop, that might be a big warning. At any rate, I do hope this is helpful. Nothing in here is investment advice, but it seems that at least Colonel Macgregor thinks that Bitcoin is a good alternative. I like Bitcoin, precious metals. I think there are a few other types of real property that I do like that might be able to protect us. And what I do to get those is I have my own algorithms that I have built to help me extract money out of the market on a daily or weekly basis. And we can help you learn to do that over at algofactory.tech. We can help you build your own trading method and be able to set aside some funds so that you can purchase whatever you think is going to get you through whatever might come. So come check us out, algofactory.tech. Trade your job, upgrade your life. We'll see you on the next one.